This is Buzz from Surf Foilz. We're going to have a bit of a yarn about what are some of the conceptions in people's minds about learning to foil. Most people, their first experience with coming across people who are foiling is they probably walk down the beach and they've seen people humping and pumping and waving their arms around, and they are just fascinated by how that action translates into the board moving through the water with it sitting up on a skinny mast. And so most people, their initial reaction is that they're fascinated of, as we all are as human beings, of just gliding across the water. And it's that thing that we've sort of developed when we first started surfing. And I think an old mate of mine, Phil Trigger from Trigger Brothers and down in Melbourne, basically said, I never ever get tired of the fact that the thrill of being able to just glide effortlessly through the water. And he was referring to surfing. So now we've taken it to another dimension where foiling in its native form, just with a wing, a mast, and a board, creates an incredible experience. But for a lot of people, it also presents a whole bunch of barriers. But it actually opens up a whole new scope for people who are probably past their surfing days simply because they just don't want to deal with the crowds. They're probably not fit enough. Their paddling potential is probably something of the past. They've got crooked knees, hips are sort of a bit wonky, and they see all these guys out in the water with probably a tinge of jealousy. But the truth of the matter is that's absolutely way, way, way from reality. So today, with the technology development with these micro motors on the like this with a prop, it basically changes how you can learn to foil, and more particularly learn to foil very safely, which is really a very key factor. So we'll just go through some of the questions that people ask me as to their fascination initially with foiling, and then their realization that they too can become part of this incredible sport. It's absolutely incredible. Once you're foiled, you've been up on foil and you're gliding around, and the board is not touching the water. So essentially that is a major difference. So you don't have the friction, but you have to rotate your thinking 90 degrees. So you're transitioning from standing on a board that's on the water, all the friction issues with water, which we use to go rail to rail, to turn and re-entries and do all the maneuvers that we've been used to doing on the board. Now it's gone 90 degrees. So once the board's out of the water and up on foil, then you have, instead of a longitudinal board, you now have a transverse wing. And it's pretty much the same sort of principles that apply to flying. So for a plane to get off the ground, it has a wing and it has an aerofoil. And as the air passes over the wing as the plane's accelerating, because of the shape of the cross section of the wing, it causes lift on the top of the wing, and so that lifts the aircraft off the ground. And usually that wing is at a high angle of attack, and by angle of attack I mean the wing is actually rotated up. So you notice when a plane's taking off, it's sort of you're sitting in the back of your seat and it's heading off. But then once it gets to cruising altitude, it levels off. And so the wing basically goes from a high angle of attack to virtually neutral aspect. Now, neutral aspect is a really good thing to remember, and we'll probably get back to that a little later, or maybe later in another video session. But so a pilot, high angle of attack, get off the ground, get up to cruising altitude, and then make sure that the plane's flying essentially flat and level, and the angle of attack has been reduced essentially to zero. But because of the shape of the foil, we still have lift and the plane stays up there, and it's using less power because it's now gliding, albeit that it's being pushed along by a couple of mega jet engines. But so in foiling, it's pretty much the same sort of analogy, is that when you want to actually get the board out of the water, you want to change the angle of attack of the foil that's sitting down on the end of the mast. And it usually has around 1 degree angle of attack. It's variations, but it's a positive angle of attack, right? So if you lean on towards the back of the board and increase that angle of attack, and you're on a wave and the wave is pushing you, or the swell is pushing you, it doesn't need to be a breaking wave to foil. As you're passing through the ocean, being pushed along by the energy of the swell, so you get that forward movement. So again, you get the same creation of lift that you get off on an aeroplane through air. So as it comes up, and then your next major issue is to make sure that the foil doesn't keep on coming up, because it'll broach and come out of the water. So the easiest way to do that is to put more weight on the front of the board, so then you reduce the angle of attack and you try to get to your neutral aspect. So that creates a situation that instead of riding rail to rail as we do on a surfboard, we've now turned it 90 degrees and we're going front and back, and our front foot and back foot. And the technique of being able to do that weight distribution forward and backwards in a very, very microscopic action is how you become a competent foiler. And we'll get onto that in the next video.